Age 34. There were burgerways here, too. The place was full of them. He flattened himself against the door as a group of three hurried past him. So do you remember how Jim is seeing the little blonde-haired boy? He's going to meet that little boy again in the future. And so this is called foreshadowing. It lets you take a peek at something and then you're going to see it again in the future. All right. So the shopkeeper is surprised to see Jim, and everyone in the store is looking at Jim, and he is feeling very self-conscious because he hasn't been around people for so long. Jim didn't like the trader's laughter. He remembered the incident now. The old Chinook had tried to steal Buckskin and put an arrow through his hat by way of discipline. "Why, I ain't after no hare," he mumbled. "I want—" He stopped as his sharp ears picked up the familiar, ominous sound of Moki's snarl. He grunted, wheeled, and was out of the room before the surprised trader could open his mouth. The instant he hit the open air, he was conscious of danger. He had cocked his rifle even before his eyes focused on the scene before him. Moki crouched with bared teeth beside Buckskin and the mule, holding at bay one frightened little boy with curly blonde hair. Behind the child stood the couple Jim had encountered in the doorway. The man, white-faced, held a pistol leveled at Moki's head. With a yell of rage, Jim sprang forward. He seized the man's wrist and wrenched it upward as the pistol roared in his ear. Half deafened, he barely heard the woman scream and the sound of shouts and the running footsteps. The fellow was struggling angrily in his grasp. "Let go of me, you fool! It's a wolf!" "Wolf? Wah!" Jim flung down the wrist he held, sending the pistol clattering to the ground. With a moccasin toe, he flipped the weapon out of reach. "You're the fool," he remarked. "That's my dog." There was a moment's silence as the man's pale eyes shifted from Jim to Moki and back again. "Dog?" he echoed. "What's going on? What's going on here?" The crowd was gathering. Jim glanced up, snapped his rifle to his shoulder, and saw the first arrivals stop in their tracks, and then fell back a pace. At the same time, he gave the low whistle that released Moki from his duty, as the dog came trotting forward, wagging his tail and whining a relieved greeting. The astonishment on the faces before Jim suddenly struck his boisterous Indian sense of humor. He grinned broadly as he lowered the gun. To his surprise, an answering grin spread over the face of the golden-haired little boy. "Say," breathed the boy, "he is a dog, ain't he? I guess I made him mad, but I never meant to. I only tried to pet that horse there. Is that your horse? My, but she's pretty. That'll do. You get on back to your folks now, do you hear?" The woman's eyes flashed suspiciously at Jim as she reached for the child's collar and hustled him out through the crowd and away. The man retrieved his pistol and stood a moment glaring at Jim. "Dog or wolf, the critter's a menace," he said. "Oughter be tied up." "By golly, you're right," muttered somebody else. "These wild Injuns and their hounds." "You ask me, they both ought to be tied up," said a louder voice. "You see him aim that rifle point blank at us a minute ago? Why, he blam near—" "Leave him be, folks. I know him. It's just Injun Jim." This was the trader's rasping voice from the doorway of the post. "Your hair's safe if you don't touch that horse of his." He went back into the building, and the men scattered reluctantly, casting hostile glances over their shoulders as they lumbered away in their cracked and broken greenhorns boots. Jim turned to quiet the nervous mare, glaring scornfully now at the wagons and their owners. "Burgerways," he thought. "What have they got to be so get out on the road about? Ain't got the sense to know a dog from a wolf. Tucker themselves out, wearing factory boots in moccasin country." He felt his anger dissolve into a nagging uneasiness. Injun Jim. He was as white as these folks. Even his medicine was white. He frowned, his mind suddenly full of that unread paper. Where was this mysterious valley, and how did one get there? He had to know. He must go back to the post. He dug one of the smaller pellets out of his possibles, wondering what Harris would consider worth his while. Everything in him bucked and shied at the idea of entrusting his magic paper to that peddler. Under ordinary circumstances, he would no more have showed it to him than he would have revealed the contents of his medicine bundle. To quiet his uneasiness, he took the bundle from his pouch and tied it under his left braid. It calmed him a little, but he had felt less vulnerable prowling among enemy lodges, a stolen horse trailing from each hand. Back in the post, a big, red-bearded man was paying for his calico fabric with a bag of gunpowder. He looked around, and so did everyone else in the place, as Jim tossed his beaver on the counter in front of the trader. "I want something read to me," Jim said quietly. "You back again?" Harris dropped the bag of gunpowder into a drawer and propped his elbows on the counter, grinning. "All right. Where's your pay? This here Plew? Why, shucks, that ain't enough for my reading. I reckon it's enough," Jim said very softly. Harris glanced at his feet. All right, it's enough this time." He flipped the Plew to one side and reached across the counter, winking at the man with the red beard who stood nearest. "Let's have your piece of writing. What is it? A billy-doo from some little digger squaw?" "No, it ain't." Jim felt the hot blood climb to his hairline. He drew the paper from his pouch. There would be specific directions in it, rivers named, mountains identified, perhaps a promise of much beaver. Did he want to share it with all those Burgaway eyes and ears behind him? But Harris already had the paper. He opened it with careless fingers and began to read loudly. "Jim, if you're still alive, come help us. Pa's been dead 3 year and Mother—" "Mother?" Jim gasped. "Wait, that's private. Give me that." Harris only bellowed louder. "And Mother died 2 months ago. We buried her by the—" Something exploded in Jim's head. Before he knew he had moved, his knife was at Harris's fat throat. "Gimme my letter," he breathed in a sudden, dead silence. The trader's body went rigid, his eyes glassy as they clung to that poised brown fist and the steel that glinted from it, then moved upward to meet Jim's stare. Abruptly, his face was bathed in sweat. Slowly, careful to move nothing but his hand, he extended the paper. Jim snatched it and turned his face like stone to that roomful of alien eyes and ears. Blindly, he pushed through them and was gone. A stir rippled over the room as people let go their held breaths and shot glances at one another. "By golly, Harris," muttered somebody, "you nigh got what you asked for that time." Harris said nothing. He was sagging on the counter, mopping at his white face, but the big red-bearded man darted him one look of contempt, moved quietly through the crowd and out the door. The trampled mud was under Jim's moccasins, the cold wind on his back, his hands moving over Buckskin's warm muscled neck in a pretense of adjusting her halter. Even when the worst of his outrage had passed, he stood sick and empty. He raised the crumpled note and stared at it hopelessly. Mother dead? Buried. He had to know the rest. But how? 15 armed Sioux couldn't drag him back into that post. There was a footstep, and then a low, quiet voice at his elbow. "Son, I reckon you must be Jim Keith." He wheeled to face the huge, red-bearded man who had watched it all. For a moment he stared into grave but gentle blue eyes. Then the man said, "My name's Rutledge, son. I knew your mother. Will you let me read that to you?" A great, painful knot untied itself in Jim's chest. Wordlessly, he handed the paper over. Rutledge smoothed it, his eyes clinging for an instant to Jim's braids and coo feather before they turned to the message. "Jim, if you're still alive, come help us," he read. "Pa's been dead 3 year, and Mother died on the trail 2 months ago. We buried her beside the Sweetwater. Now me and Sally and Daniel is all that's left. We're just across the Snake, bound for the Willamette Valley, and none of us old enough to claim land after we get there except you. If you ever cared anything for Mother or anything of us, then come. It's our only chance. Johnny." There was a silence in which even the roar of the river seemed to recede into a far and dreamlike whisper. Then Rutledge's big hands folded the note carefully and slowly and handed it back. His face was troubled, but kind. "They're here in the Dalles now, son," he said softly. "You want I should take you to 'em?" Jim nodded. His breath was deep and hard, his whole mind full of awe. He knew now which valley he must go to and why everything had happened just as it had. He was to find Johnny again. That's what the paper meant. He was to go home. His medicine was more powerful than he had dreamed. Chapter 4. Dusk was gathering over the broad, sloping area between the river and hills where the wagon train was encamped. There was a curious, disheveled air about the place. Wagons angled this way and that under the dripping trees. Oxen and cattle bawled mournfully. Campfires sparked here and there through the gloom, and people moved about them wearily. "It's ever family for itself now," Rutledge was saying as he led the way over the muddy, uneven ground. "The train's busted up. Folks got to tackle this gorge the best they know how. Ain't no way to go it together. Johnny and me's been planning to team up on our raft. Built it big enough for both families if we can. I reckon we'll find him at my wagon now. We was going to talk about it some more this evening." Jim moved silent as a shadow at his side, with Moki close at heel, and Buckskin and the mule clopping behind, was grateful for the quiet, steady rumble of the man's voice, though he only half listened to the words. His mouth was dry. Would he know Johnny after all these years? He groped after fragments of memory, a tousled dark head in the next cot, loud arguments about chores or bean shooters or who broke the window, low-voiced talk over the candles were out at night, but Johnny's face remained blurred and featureless, save for black eyes with thick black lashes. How far away it all was. "Been a mighty hard trail for Johnny, for all of 'em, since your mother died," Rutledge was saying. "They're fine kids. I've raised 3 myself, and I know. Ain't no soul in the wagon train wouldn't stake his last ox on Johnny Keith. And Sally, well, she's got more grit than many a man I know." Sally, a 7-year-old with a mop of yellow curls, a childish treble. "Mama, them boys, they woke the baby." Jim stopped walking. "Baby?" "Yes, Dan'l. The letter had mentioned him. Me and Sally and Dan'l is all that's left. The 3 of them on their own from the Sweetwater to the Cascades?" A sense of guilt, powerful as it was unexpected, filled Jim suddenly. It alarmed and bewildered him. His fingers tightened on his rifle. His glance flashed over trees, sullen sky, mud, and trampled grass, and then lit on Rutledge's burly figure, half turning to wait for him a few steps ahead. "Something wrong, son?" came the deep, quiet voice. Jim shook his head. Nothing was wrong. He was just jumpy. He moistened stiff lips and moved forward. "Let's get on with it. How much further?" "Just yonder. That's my wagon by the pine trees. Now don't let that bunch of people bother you none. Looks like a crowd, but it ain't nobody but my family and a few folks from our train. Just neighbors dropped in, likely to borrow something." Jim hardly heard the low, reassuring flow of words as they neared the wagon. A snatch of melody drifted toward them in the chilly wind, and Rutledge chuckled.